Andrew Johnson and the Civil War details previously discussed, perhaps seeking a compelling, emotionally engaging angle to draw interest in his story or the war's impact. An emotional hook is a narrative device that grabs attention by evoking strong feelings, sympathy, outrage, hope, or curiosity. Below, on Andrew Johnson's complex role in the Civil War and Reconstruction, tying it to the human cost and moral struggles of the era. Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States, 1865 to 1869. Played a significant role during the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, primarily as a political figure rather than a military leader. Since your query asks for complete war details in relation to Andrew Johnson, I will focus on his involvement in the Civil War, his actions, policies, and their implications during and immediately after the conflict, particularly in the context of Reconstruction. I'll also address his stance on key issues like slavery, secession, and emancipation, drawing on historical context and available sources. Andrew Johnson's role in the Civil War background and political stance. Early life and beliefs. Born into poverty on December 29, 1808. In Raleigh, North Carolina, Johnson was a self-taught tailor with no formal education. He rose through Tennessee politics as a Jacksonian Democrat, advocating for states' rights and the interests of poor white farmers against the planter elite. Johnson believed the U.S. Constitution protected private property, including enslaved people, and initially opposed abolishing slavery. However, he was a staunch Unionist, rejecting Southern secession as unconstitutional. Opposition to secession. When the Civil War began in April 1861, after Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter, Tennessee voted to secede in June 1861. Johnson, then a U.S. Senator, was the only Southern senator to remain loyal to the Union, making him a hero in the North and a traitor in the South. His decision was driven by a belief in preserving the Union, not racial equality. Key roles during the war. Senator and Union advocate, 1861. Johnson traveled across Tennessee to oppose secession, facing significant personal risk, including Confederate threats to his life. He left his family and personal papers in Greenville, Tennessee, many of which were lost or damaged during the war. His loyalty earned him recognition from President Abraham Lincoln and Northern leaders. Military Governor of Tennessee, 1862 to 1865. In 1862, Lincoln appointed Johnson as military governor of Tennessee after Union forces regained control of parts of the state. His role was to restore federal authority, suppress Confederate resistance, and reorganize the state government. Johnson implemented harsh measures against Confederate sympathizers, including arrests and property seizures. However, he initially resisted emancipation, asking Lincoln to exclude Tennessee from the Emancipation Proclamation, effective January 1, 1863, because he viewed slavery as a state issue. He later supported emancipation as a war measure to weaken the Confederacy. Not out of moral conviction as governor, Johnson began to shift toward supporting limited rights for freed African Americans, but only to the extent it served Union goals. His policies focused on military expediency and Union restoration. Vice President, 1865. In 1864, Lincoln chose Johnson as his running mate on the National Union Party ticket to appeal to Southern Unionists and War Democrats. The ticket won a landslide victory against General George McClellan with 212 electoral votes to 21 and 55% of the popular vote. Johnson's vice presidential inauguration on March 4, 1865, was marred by controversy. Recovering from typhoid fever, he drank whiskey to steady himself, delivering a slurred, incoherent speech that led to false rumors of alcoholism. Civil War context. War's end. The Civil War effectively ended on April 9, 1865, when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, Virginia. 5 days later, on April 14, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. Johnson narrowly escaped assassination, as Booth's co-conspirator, George Atzerodt, failed to act. Johnson's ascendancy. On April 15, 1865, Johnson was sworn in as president by Chief Justice Salmon Chase, inheriting the task of leading the nation through the war's aftermath and Reconstruction. Johnson's policies and actions post-war. Johnson's presidency coincided with the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, and his policies during Reconstruction shaped his legacy more than his wartime actions. Since the Civil War had ended by the time he became president, his war-related impact lies in how he addressed the conflict's consequences. Reconstruction policies, lenient restoration. Johnson, a war Democrat, favored rapid restoration of the seceded states to the Union with minimal federal intervention. He issued proclamations in May 1865, granting amnesty to most former Confederates who took an oath of allegiance, except for high-ranking leaders and wealthy individuals who needed special presidential pardons. This allowed many pre-war Southern elites to regain power. Black codes and racial policies. Johnson permitted Southern states to form new governments, which often enacted black codes to restrict the rights of newly freed African Americans, effectively recreating slavery-like conditions. He showed little interest in protecting freedmen's rights, reflecting his belief that the federal government should not interfere with state governance or racial hierarchies. Clashes with Congress. Johnson's lenient approach clashed with the Republican-dominated Congress, particularly the Radical Republicans, who sought to secure civil rights for African Americans. He vetoed key legislation, including the Freedmen's Bureau Bill 1866, which aimed to provide aid and protection to freed slaves. The Civil Rights Act of 1866, which granted citizenship and equal protection under the law to African Americans. He also opposed the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed equal protection and due process, encouraging Southern states to reject it. These vetoes, overridden by Congress, deepened the divide between Johnson and lawmakers' Tenure of Office Act and Impeachment 1867-1868. Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act in 1867 to limit Johnson's ability to remove cabinet officials, without Senate approval, targeting his attempts to dismiss Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a radical Republican ally. Johnson's violation of the act by removing Stanton in February 1868 led to his impeachment by the House on 11 charges, primarily for violating the act and undermining Congress. The Senate trial began on March 5, 1868, and ended on May 16, 1868, with Johnson acquitted by one vote short of the two-thirds majority needed for conviction. Some senators voted against conviction to preserve the presidency's constitutional independence. Military and strategic context. Johnson was not directly involved in military strategy or battles, as his roles were political. However, his tenure as military governor involved overseeing Union military operations in Tennessee, including maintaining control against guerrilla warfare and Confederate resistance. The Civil War's military details, such as major battles, for example, Gettysburg, Antietam, or Appomattox, were managed by generals like Grant, Sherman, and Lee, under Lincoln's oversight. Johnson's focus was on governance, not battlefield tactics. Key war-related details. Emancipation stance. Johnson initially opposed emancipation, viewing it as a state matter. By 1863, as military governor, he supported it as a war measure to disrupt the Confederacy, not for moral reasons. He owned enslaved people himself, including a teenage girl named Dolly and her half-brother Sam, and his racial prejudices persisted throughout his career. Union loyalty. Johnson's decision to remain in the Senate after Tennessee's secession made him a symbol of Southern Unionism. His actions as military governor helped secure Tennessee as a Union stronghold. though his harsh policies alienated some residents. Reconstruction's impact on war's legacy. Johnson's failure to protect freedmen's rights and his leniency toward former Confederates undermined the war's emancipatory goals. Historians argue that his policies prolonged racial strife and failed to address the South's underlying social issues. Contrasting with what Lincoln might have achieved, historical assessment criticism. Historians widely regard Johnson as one of the worst U.S. presidents due to his Reconstruction policies. His opposition to civil rights for African Americans, rigid adherence to states' rights, and inability to compromise with Congress are seen as failures to heal the nation post-war. His actions are blamed for extending racial inequality and delaying progress on civil rights. Legacy. Earlier historians pre-World War II viewed Johnson more favorably, praising his strict constitutionalism and resistance to Congress. However, modern scholarship, especially since the 1950s civil rights movement, criticizes his racial biases and incompetence in navigating Reconstruction. Personal toll. Johnson faced significant personal risk during the war, including Confederate threats. His papers, stored in Greenville, were largely destroyed, though some were later recovered and are now held by the Library of Congress. Additional notes. Death and legacy. After leaving the presidency in 1869, Johnson returned to Tennessee, losing bids for the Senate and House before winning a Senate seat in 1875. He died of a stroke on July 31, 1875, at age 66, and was buried in Greenville with an American flag and a copy of the Constitution, per his wishes. Your ultimate destination for powerful stories, historic battles, and fearless military leaders who shape the world, whether you're passionate about history, strategy, or modern warfare.